revolutionary principles evident in modern times? Whenever you're ready.
Although many claim our constitutional principles to be revolutionary, the writing of the Constitution is particularly counter-revolutionary. The iconic preamble to our Constitution utilizes similar beliefs of the English government, from which we mimic while, in turn, trying to separate from them so-called tyranny.
However, our constitutional system relies on John Locke's social contract in a way that most other governments have been unable to do. Locke believed that the government should protect the life, liberty, and property of the people. If the government was to fail at protecting these natural given rights, then the people have the right to overthrow their government.
Now, in the modern United States, this right is assumed and only specified in the Declaration of Independence. Many argue that the overthrowing of a tyrannical and unsuccessful government isn't a right, and more a duty to secure better conditions for all who will come after. In short, the United States has established the consent of the governed.
This consent is what influenced the making of governmental procedures like the amendment process and election system. Even though the idea of consent seems revolutionary, it does contain many flaws. One of the biggest fundamental issues with the idea of consent and the US Constitution is that the entire Constitution, down to the amendment process, is based around a compromise.
A proposed amendment has to go through 2/3 of both of the houses of Congress or through the legislation of 3/4 of the state before it can be implemented. This means that critical and necessary amendments cannot often be put into place in a timely fashion. This is proven by Amendment 19, which guarantees the right of women to vote.
Amendment 19 was ratified on August 18th, 1920, 48 years after its initial proposal to Congress in 1878. That being said, as long as majority vote rules are passed, nearly any law can be added to the Constitution. This leads us to Amendment 17.
The compliance and support of 3/4 of the states ratified the National Prohibition Act on December 18, 1919, a mere 13 months after its initial proposal to Congress. The compromise and consent within our government isn't revolutionary due to the fact that it relies on an overwhelming majority to create any real and necessary change to the Constitution.
The most revolutionary principles that can be seen today are not necessarily within the government, but rather within the people. Consent of the governed, as originally suggested by John Locke, still plays a major role in modern American politics.
The Declaration of Independence is a document based around separation from the central government and is the first in suggesting that security of individual rights. Our current government, especially post 9/11, is built around securing unity and safety, even at the expense of citizens' rights. As major events like the Cold War and 9/11 become more distant memories, the general populace has started pushing to resecure the rights that have been compromised.
The most prevalent example is the various voices being raised about cancel culture. As of recently, many celebrities and politicians, including former President Donald Trump and actress Gina Carano, have been canceled due to what they've said, tweeted, or posted. This cancellation has led to backlash from many who claim that the First Amendment is being violated in these types of situations.
The First Amendment gained inspiration from John Locke and the ability of a government to provide life, liberty, and happiness. The revolutionary principle of consent that helped our founding fathers draft the Constitution can still be seen in modern times through the citizens as they follow John Locke and his social contract.
Okay, we'll get involved now with our follow-up questioning. Oh, where to begin? You had said so many really interesting things. So I want to pick up on, you said and argue that some people might argue that the right to revolution isn't a right, but a duty. Elaborate on that for me a little bit. When would we know it's our duty, and what would that involve?
Well, ultimately, our government is focused around life, liberty, property, and happiness of the people. If these things are not being fulfilled from the government, then it is time for a change. And we can start that even with the amendment process. That in its own way can be a form of change. And that in its own way is not necessarily overthrowing the government, but it's the first step to that change that can lead to eventually the overthrowing of the government, like we did in our own revolution. If the ideal principles that we seek of we the people are not being fulfilled, then that is time to change.
And we can start to see this more in John Locke's works. Get into trouble, necessary trouble, good trouble, to secure the soul of America. If the soul of America is being violated, that's what becomes our duty, to get into that necessary trouble to secure our own future and safety.
And the whole purpose of a government is to serve the people. It is for the people. And so we believe that the moment that we start serving the government and they act selfishly as opposed to acting in the will of the people, that it is time for those revolutionary principles to occur, and it is time to revolt.
Yeah, it's time to make that change.
Yeah, make that change.
Okay, thank you.
So you referenced Locke's social contract several times. Can you elaborate on what the role of the people is what's the people's role or responsibilities in the social contract?
So the people within the social contract are there to secure and help the government run, to give up what things that they own to help the government run and secure the rights and safeties of the people that the government said that they would, to give up some things to guarantee others, give up some monetary stuff like taxes, to guarantee that the government can run things like a military budget to keep us safe and protected.
Yeah, without the people, the government, and which is run off of the social contract, would not be possible.
Okay.
Could I jump in on that point? We're placing a lot of faith in the people. I read a statistic that the average American watches 6 hours of TV a day. Do we think that, I mean, we're not going to be elitist here, but how does it play into your conception of how this all working if the people are misinformed or misled?
I think if that is the case, if they are being misinformed, misled, then that is part of our own problem as we the people. We need to start to secure that liberty for ourselves. That is a right we have as Americans, that ability to get the information, get the right information, and get that information validated. So that is part of, again, as you said, we're putting a lot of reliance on we the people. That is something that we need to promote within our culture.
And that's part of the reason why we have so much compromise within our court systems and our legislative branch, for instance, is even within that, if we have misinformed people, that compromise can help root out and prevent that misinformation. Because it's much harder to convince half the population of something wrong than one or two.
And like Olivia said about it's a culture thing. I believe that as a nation to become informed, we need to stop worrying about what dress was worn down the red carpet at the Grammys, and more along the lines of what's happening in our nation domestically, that we can change to better our future as citizens and as a country.
Let's talk about voting, right? Voting is the way we, on a regular basis, or perhaps we give our consent, or we get to change our leaders potentially. We see a movement among some states to change the voting laws that some argue are in the name of election security, and others are arguing is voter suppression. So what do you think about that movement? And are there constitutional considerations we should be thinking about as we look at states messing around with voting?
Well, I think that as we start changing voting specifically, we start reinforcing this idea of compromise, because a lot of the states are pushing for a more direct vote among stuff like the Electoral College. Get rid of the Electoral College, add in this more direct vote. And this, we'd have to change the Constitution. We'd have to change something big to achieve that change. And it brings in, I think it would work better within this more digital era, because people do have access to that information. Whereas when this was implemented, it was where people didn't have enough information, and there was a lot more to be said about misinformation. Because, well, nowadays we're constantly getting information fed to us. Back then they had one or two sources which could easily be swayed. Now we have access to all the sources in the world if we truly wanted to.
Kind of going off of what Eli said with compromise, especially, we need to look at whether this new voting system, what some states are pushing for, if it follows what our original government intended, if it still promotes the life, liberty, property, and happiness of the people, if it is If it is within the best interest of the people, then we need to go forward with it. But we need to look at the constitutional principles, such as John Locke's social contract, and see if it really follows the heart of America.
And I'm assuming what you're saying about voter suppression is based solely around like the whole voter ID situation going on in many states. And I believe that any time that we restrict the right of any US citizen, it is a bad thing. And the expansion of rights is always betters the country. And so with the whole voter ID and other limitations on voting, I think in the end, those only hurt America and the change that we seek.
Can you elaborate on some either elements or components of consent that are present today? Or what constitute, how do we illustrate consent, or what constitutes consent, or what are elements of consent in our country today?
The biggest form of consent within our government today is, of course, voting, and we've already kind of covered that. And that's just a way for we, the people, to show, yes, we give consent for this person to be in office, and we don't want this person to be in office. Voting for what we want as we, the people. However, there are other forms of consent that we see within our own government system, even in ways that we do things. So even with protests, for as example, recently the Black Lives Matter protests and other protests around the nation, that is a form of consent. We are showing that this is not working within our government. We need something else, and this right is guaranteed, the right to a peaceful protest. And that is just another form of consent within we, the people.
We had been consenting to how the government was running things, and then when what we had been consenting to changed and no longer became applicable to us, we remove that consent and we say, change it, please. Thank you.
Okay. I think we're almost out of
Yeah, it's about 5 seconds.
time, so nicely done.
Yeah.
We won't get into
Time.
the question.
Well done.
Thank you.
Steve, you're up for.
All right, well, as I said, nicely done. You, the three of you worked together very well, and you were able to build off one another's reflections, comments, and critical thinking that you added to this. So you did very well in that regard. I was getting ready to go down kind of into the social contract and social media relationship, and is that making things better or worse, or it's kind of a wash, a little bit of both. So anyway, but you did a nice job, and again, I commend you for getting here and all the work you put in. Thank you, teachers, as well as all those that help you along the way. So you do well moving along, and as well as pass this competition. So it's nice to be able to have the conversation with you, and best wishes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So yeah, I concur with what Steve said. I think you guys did a great job. You have a lot of energy, and it's natural, right? I didn't feel like I was being sold. I was having a conversation with some real passionate young people, and that was evident that you care. And that's the most important thing about everything we do, is that you all going to move forward and take over our country, and that's a good thing. I just have to say, your contention from the outset with it was a counter-revolution. That's a bold statement. I happen to agree with you. And then you talk about it. It's like, look, we bring in amendment process. We don't have to have revolutions in the streets. We can change our system. But then you recognized that's a kind of a tough system, right? It takes so long, and it takes so super majorities, and you're really grappling with this design that we all, revere the Constitution and everything, but it's got problems. It's not perfect. And we've still got to work out some of the kinks 200 plus years later. If you think about the states now, and you reflected that, you recognize, hey, look, it might be necessary, but also it might be suppression. Don't forget the 14th Amendment, right? It flips the relationship after the Civil War, where the states now are really, truly subservient to the national government, at least in some areas. And we have the 14th Amendment to protect us in our states if our states are taking advantage of us. And so if there's a group in Georgia, for example, that can make the claim legitimately that they're being suppressed, they have the courts to go to, and they can claim a 14th Amendment violation And so look into that and think about that as you move forward, because that's a really powerful tool, as it has been through our history for minority groups. So lots of other things you did fantastically. I really enjoyed it. Cancel culture could have been another half-hour conversation. Unfortunately, we'll put that off to another day. Good luck to y'all.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
I would,
Okay.
I get to say a
I'm
few
sorry.
compliments. I get to say a few compliments too.
Yeah.
I'm not in Hawaii, but I still have some.
They just
so-
outed me.
So guys, now having made that big stand, I'm just going to say stuff that my colleagues have already said. Like Mr. Fox, I immediately latched onto the statement that the Constitution is a counter-revolutionary sort of document. And like Mr. Fox, I agree with that statement. And if I hadn't agreed with it, I think you would have supported it and persuaded me that way. But that's definitely something that we hadn't heard a whole lot of up until this point. So kudos to you for recognizing that. A nice array of different things that you threw at us. We got Locke's social contract, of course, cancel culture, bringing it to present day. And one of the aspects of your analysis that I was impressed by was both sides of the coin. So, so consent to the government, it's expressed in our Constitution in these different ways. Now, there's some flaws to that system, and here are the flaws. 1, 2, 3. So that shows that your answers and your prepared statements weren't dogmatic. I think the point of these exercises, the competition, is critical analysis and sort of thinking through the topics, and that means seeing the different perspectives. Here's how it works. Here's how it could be improved, et cetera, et cetera. And you folks did a fine job in that regard. So I thank you for your time, and this was very enjoyable for me.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
All the best.